That video kills me every time. It's not about the nail. That was the name of that video. And don't worry, this is not a men versus women message today, okay? I actually opened with that video because, to be completely honest, I feel very heavy about today's message, and I have a few things I want to share. You guys know that I like to mix in some funny stories here and there. This is one of those messages that I got to the end and I was like, uh-oh. I need to find somewhere to make sure that we just get a little bit of laughter in. And then I remembered about this video, and it works perfectly with what we're going to talk about today. I preached a few months ago on Thomas, and I shared this simple truth with you. Every scar has a story. I walked you through some of my scars, those on my fingers from the knife I had no business buying, the ones that required stitches. Dan, don't worry, no details. Dan doesn't like the bloody stories. He's asked me to warn him. No details today. But every scar, it has a story. These scars, they help serve as reminders of where we've been and what we have overcome. And sure, there are some scars that they bring painful recollections more than others, but yet the truth stands clear. Every scar has a story. But for all of these telltale, distinguishable scars on the outside, there's scars that we carry inside. That because no one can see them, no one can understand the weight they carry inside or the influence they exert in our everyday lives. There are internal wounds that because no one sees, it makes it easier to not seek healing. To leave as is. To never have relief from it because it escapes everyone else. Now, just to kind of serve as an example, because as I'm preaching this message, I really believe that there are those of us here that have scars inside that we've never dealt with, that we have learned how to live in avoidance or even outright denial of these very scars that are exerting incredible influence and impact in our lives. And I believe that Jesus wants to set us free from that today. He wants there to be a restoration that takes place. He wants there to be a wholeness that takes place that we have never had. And so I just want to share this story with you. It's nothing super profound, but it's an example of how we have a scar inside. See, my niece is 3 years old now, and she's a little singer and a little musician. And she just can't stop singing, and she'll make up a song about anything on the spot. And so I remembered that we had a keyboard in my garage that's easily 20 years old at this point. But on this keyboard, there's a song bank. And so I set up the keyboard, and I taught Emmy how to play the songs off of this keyboard. And so I forget which song is her favorite, but she knows which number it is. So she types in the number, she presses enter, and the song plays back, and she's, all happy with her music, singing along and humming along and everything. But there was a song that caught my eye. And so I typed it in, and I started to play. And one thing I'm learning is just how perceptive little kids are, right? So obviously I don't have kids of my own, right? But Emmy's like a sponge, right? And so this song starts to play, and it immediately, it triggered something really deep inside me. Because this was the song that my grandma, she would sing and she would whistle all the time. It's this really popular Spanish song. The last memory I have of my grandma, 20 years ago, I'm in the kitchen with my mom. And my mom's trying to get some stuff done. And she's looking at my grandma, and she's just like, hey, Ma, we got to go. And my grandma's just standing in the same spot, wiping the same spot of the table over and over. And so I'm standing there looking at my grandma, and I'm standing there looking at my mom. Mom, stop. Don't worry about it. It's fine. And my grandma just stays there. And I'm looking at my grandma, and it's not making sense. Mom said, stop. Why don't you stop? So my mom says it again, Grandma, stop. And it's at that point that we notice that she's completely red in the face. There's no awareness at all in her face, but because I didn't understand what was happening, I yelled at my grandma. Grandma, stop. Listen to Mom, stop. It was at that point that my mom realized what was happening. My grandma was having a stroke. But I'm at 10 years old. I don't know this. And so my grandma, you see, like, when I hear kids talk about, oh, Grandma bought me this and got me that and whatever, like, when I was born, I had just one grandparent. That was it. My grandma, she was living, she only knew Spanish. Spanish was my first language. Hearing that song, it brought back that the very last memory I have of my grandma is yelling at her. And I know that there were probably hospital visits and other time that I spent with her, but the very last memory I have of my grandma and yelling at her. And that hurts. It hurt a lot. And so hearing that song was a trigger, and it showed me that there was a scar inside. Right? There was a scar inside. And you see, I know that's a simple story. It's not super profound or anything, but I believe that there are some of us here that we know where that trigger is. And so we have learned how to live completely avoiding the trigger, thinking that that's it. It's done.
You're coming in and out.
And so this trigger that had lied dormant for 20 years was all of a sudden hit. And there was an overwhelming of emotion where I had to look away from Emmy because Emmy could feel something. And so Emmy's staring at me, and I'm trying to show her that I'm not breaking down because of everything that this song brought flooding back to me. For all the telltale, distinguishable scars on the outside, we carry scars inside. That again, because no one can see them, no one can understand the weight that they carry inside or the influence that they exert. And because they're internal, we almost come to this understanding of, it just is what it is. And I'm here to tell you, Jesus wants wholeness for us. Jesus, He wants fullness for us. But you see, sometimes we get used to avoiding these triggers and avoiding these scars and living in denial and avoidance. And so instead of wholeness, there's only partialness. Instead of fullness, there's emptiness. Instead of confidence, there's insecurity. But God desires to give us fullness. He desires to give us wholeness, and He desires to give us confidence. But as always, it doesn't come down to God's power to help us find the relief that grace promises. But it's about our faith and the action that flows from that faith. Listen, today I believe that if you've never heard the incredible, amazing news about Jesus Christ, that today is an opportunity for you to have a true encounter with grace that can change your life from a doomed destiny to a glorious one. It's a decision that requires actions to follow, but today is the best day to encounter grace and come to a saving belief in grace. Today, you might be sitting here, you might be a tried and true follower of Christ, but seeing as we're all human here, there is sometimes where we achieve belief in grace, but for some reason we become like the main character of the opening video. We talk about our problems, we don't allow anyone or anything to address the problem, and for all of our belief in grace, we never find relief in grace. And today I feel powerfully that there's a breakthrough that can happen. That some of those things that have laid dormant for a long time, that today not only can there be belief in grace, but that today there can be a relief in grace from something that may have tormented you all of your life. Something that lays there that you know very well exactly where it is. That you have suppressed and repressed it. But I'm here to tell you, God says, he who the Son sets free is free indeed. He says nothing about suppression. He says nothing about repression. He says liberty. He says where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And so I believe that breakthrough is possible today. Because today, someone can be transformed from belief in grace to finding relief in grace. You see, it could be an old wound that you've tried to bury deep. It could be something that you've suppressed, and for some reason, you have decided that that scar, that wound, that's your cross to bear. If you do that, this is what I believe. I believe that you have crucified yourself on a powerless, empty cross. And you've adapted to life hanging on a dead tree. Why? A lifeless tree provides no relief. But grace in its fullness can provide relief. Right? Because the cross that Jesus hung on, it was a tree that was uprooted and put in the form of a cross. But on that cross, there was a life-giving blood that was let loose on that cross that made that cross not a lifeless cross, but a life-giving cross to address every wound, to address every scar. But when you let your wound become your identity, when you let your scar become your story, you're crucifying yourself on a powerless tree. And the truth is, there's a powerful tree that you could come and kneel at the foot of and find relief in grace. So if you're sitting here knowing you possess belief, but yet you're struggling, knowing that there's something inside that needs the relief of grace, this morning is for you. And so today we return to my favorite theme in the gospel, an encounter with grace. I have three words through which we view an encounter with grace. I shared them with you a few months ago. The first one is perception. The second word is reception. And the third word is reaction. Perception, reception, reaction. Are you with me on that? Everyone say perception. Everyone say reception and reaction. Mark 5, verses 25 through 34. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." So just to remind you of these three words, I'm going to give you the super short recap of the rich young ruler and the woman at the well. Those are the two previous encounters with grace we've talked about. The rich young ruler, he starts with an incorrect perception of who Jesus is. He takes off running to Christ. He puts himself on his knees before Christ, and then he says these two words, good teacher, his perception of Christ was limited. Good teacher was how you address every rabbi. Jesus is not an everyman rabbi. Jesus is the Savior. Amen? Anyone with me on that? And so he calls him good teacher. And then I love Jesus because he puts his tongue firmly in his cheek and he says, "Why do you call me good?" Right? Realize the irony here. Jesus is God. God is good. Therefore, transitive property, Jesus is good. So calling Jesus good is absolutely proper, but Jesus recognized something. The perception of who he was limited in this rich young ruler. And Jesus also knew this. The man would not be able to receive from Christ until he perceived Christ correctly. Good teacher. Perception never increased. And because the perception never increased, reception did not happen. Are you following me on that? Perception, reception, reaction. And so therefore, because there was no reception, because perception was limited, the reaction was a negative one. The Bible tells us that at that, the man turned around and walked away crestfallen. But then we have the story of the woman at the well. I love this because in this story, we clearly see this formula of perception, reception, reaction clear as day. Because if you remember, Jesus asks her for a drink of water, and the woman immediately retreats to societal standards. Because she says, "Aren't you a Jew?" Perception. She has looked at Jesus, and she has labeled Jesus a Jew. Just like a rabbi, Jesus is no ordinary Jew. Correct? Right? And so she looks, and her initial perception of Jesus is, "You are just a Jew." But I love the story because it continues. Right? So Jesus again decides, you know what, this woman needs a little help. I'm going to help her out today. Right? And he's like, you know what? Why don't you go get your husband? Come back. Meet me at the well. Right? And the woman stops, and she's like, okay, we need to fill you in, Jesus. Right? She's like, listen, the guy I'm with right now, not my husband, and there's also 5 ex-husbands in the picture. Right? So like she says that, and Jesus actually says, you're right. He's not your husband, and you've got 5 guys that you've already been through. You're on guy number 5.5 on your way to 6. Right? Jesus speaks truth to her. He shows that he knows her. And then I love the woman's response. "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet." What happened with perception right there? We went from Jew to prophet. Her perception has now increased from Jew to prophet. And if you remember what follows, right? At that point in time, they were divided over where they should worship. So now, because her perception of Christ increased, she decides to go from basic arithmetic to quantum physics, right? So she goes from, okay, this guy knows a little bit about my life, to, hey, Jesus, tell me where we should worship. Now, here's the cool thing about Jesus. He answers the question, but he also knows the answer is far over this woman's head. She's not ready to receive the fullness of everything that Jesus had for her. But the important thing was perception increased. And as perception increased, reception increased. And then the story continues, and we get to the point where this woman, who first started seeing Jesus as a mere Jew, and then increased to, you're a prophet, she asks the question, could you be the Messiah? Do you see what happened? Limited perception meant limited reception. But as her perception increased, all of a sudden she was able to receive more from Jesus. And what's the reaction we see with this woman? Once she receives from Jesus, it says that she leaves running, joyful, running into the town saying, "Come see the man who told me everything about myself." And she was happy about it. Right? Like, that's why that's crazy. Right? Because if you look at your own life, you know very well there are some chapters you would not like to make it to the final draft. Right? There are some chapters you are totally okay with striking them out and leaving them be. But this woman, after having her perception increase, her reception increased, and so her reaction was, "I've been made whole." Because remember what I shared with you? 5 husbands, she's living with the 6th. But Jesus, number 7, the number of completion, spoke wholeness into her life. And she was no longer living in part. Jesus had imparted wholeness to her. Do you see perception, reception, reaction there? Are we seeing it? Perception, reception, reaction. And so now I want to read Luke 8:42 to 48 for you. Just because this is in 3 different Gospels. Luke is the second longest, and then Matthew devoted all of 3 verses to this story. Okay, so Luke says this: "As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped." "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Finally, let's read Matthew's 3-verse version of this story. "Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, 'If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed.' Jesus turned and saw her. 'Take heart, daughter,' he said. 'Your faith has healed you.' And the woman was healed at that moment." So the first word is perception. And in all 3 stories, we hear something along these lines: "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. If only I touch his cloak, I will be healed." Unlike the rich young ruler who had 100% incorrect perception of Jesus from the beginning, we see tremendous faith in this woman. Why? Because she sees Jesus, and her perception of Jesus is, "If I could just get a little bit of Jesus." Oh, come on now. If I could just get a little bit of Jesus, everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be okay. If I could just grab his cloak, I'm going to be healed. She exemplifies tremendous faith. She starts with the 100% correct perception of Jesus. But I want to look at the obstacles that stood in her way that moved her from perception to reception. First, she has been dealing with this for 12 years. Understand that this issue makes her unclean. Because she is unclean, this means she is no longer fit to be a part of everyday society. She is now an outcast. That means for 12 years, she has been unclean. She has been isolated. Doctors came and went, but no solution. She remained unclean. She remained an outcast. This had been a battle that it had been draining on her financially, socially, emotionally, physically, and for all of this, she had to fight it alone. Pain breeds in isolation. So imagine what 12 years of isolation with this pain has wrought on her. She has been made an outcast because of a condition that seemingly had no remedy. Now listen, this next point is one that I really sought God on. Confusion comes in when you let condition dictate your crowd. Confusion sets in when you let your condition dictate your crowd. You following me? So, confusion was setting in because think about it this way. The most common type of outcast in that day and age was the leper. Now, the leper was someone that was covered with sores, open wounds. You could see that person from a mile away and know, I need to stay away from that person. But understand the confusion here. Does she have any sores? No. Is there anything that makes her the outcast like the lepers? No. But her condition had dictated her crowd. Can you imagine being surrounded by people that you are seen just the same as them, and yet in reality you're nothing like them? Do you get what I'm saying here? There's a confusion. Imagine seeing a colony of lepers together, and then this woman on the outside that looks perfectly fine. That's where this woman was. Do you understand how isolated she was? Even the community that had been dictated for her could not identify with the battle that she was facing. She had been made an outcast. And pain, it breeds in isolation. Leprosy is impossible to hide. Painful wounds, visible scars. And yet here's this woman that for all we know, there's no visible scar, there's no visible wound, and yet her condition has dictated her crowd. But I'm here to tell you something. When Jesus died for you, when you accepted Jesus as Lord and Savior, He said, you're set apart now. I have called you out of darkness, and I'm calling you into marvelous light. And so you no longer have to be surrounded by the same crowd that was holding you down. No, now you can come and you can plug yourself into a life-giving church to be surrounded by people whose eyes are fixed on the author, the finisher, and the perfecter of our faith. But here's this woman, completely isolated, even in a community of outcasts. She is singular. Society dictated that at that point she saw Jesus, right? And her perception was correct. If I could just get a little bit of Jesus, if I could just get a little bit of Jesus, I'm going to be okay. But society said, you're not allowed anywhere near Jesus. You have got to stay away from the normal people. You have got to stay away from the healthy people. You're unclean. You are sick. You are unhealthy. You do not belong with the healthy. You do not belong with the normal. All you need to do is take one look at society today to understand this truth. Society today will do nothing to promote your relationship with Jesus Christ. All you got to do is look at California. Literally, in the last 2 days, there's a bill getting ready to be passed that says Christian colleges in California will no longer be allowed to uphold their moral values for their student code. Not only that, it makes it easier for gay and lesbian students to sue the school on discrimination. It's happening in Canada as well. Society is not going to do anything to try and push you closer to Christ. You have to decide that no matter what society says, I'm going after Christ. I'm going after Jesus. But what's your perception of Jesus? Because you see, you're going to be limited in your ability to stand out for Jesus if your perception of Jesus is not complete. Are you following me? And so here's this woman who is beat up. She is beat down. She's battered. She is oppressed. She is sick, but she wants wholeness. And she wants fullness. And she says, I just need a little bit of Jesus. Is there anyone who needs a little bit of Jesus this morning? Society dictated her to stay away from Jesus. But no matter what society dictated, it was all defeated with one simple action. One action that flowed from faith. She believed, and she wanted to receive. She believed, and she wanted to receive. Listen, if you believe in Jesus, He's got something for you. Is your belief in a place that you're ready to receive what He's got for you? That's where she's at. She believes and she wants to receive. Her faith dictated her action. Faith without works is dead. Imagine if even with her 100% correct perception of Jesus, if she had stayed with the outcasts, she never would have been healed. Are you following me? That you might have the correct perception of Jesus, but because you never reached out to grab Him, you can miss out on what He's got for you. And that's why I believe that today could be a day of breakthrough. That stuff that's been buried deep inside, that you have learned to live by avoiding and by being in denial of and by suppressing and repressing, God is saying, I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. He wants you to be whole. He wants you to be full. He wants you to have confidence. Yes, does the thief come to steal, kill, and destroy? Absolutely. But John 10:10 has the whole gospel in one verse, because even though the thief has come to steal, kill, and destroy, Jesus stood there and said, but I've come. See, everything changes when Jesus comes. Everything changes when Jesus comes. And so He says, yes, there is a thief that wants you, but I'm on the scene. I'm here now. And because I'm here now, not only can you have life, I've got abundant life for you. If you believe, are you ready to receive? That's what Jesus is asking this morning. And I believe breakthrough is going to happen this morning. When faith propels belief in grace, we find relief in grace. When faith propels belief in grace, we find relief in grace. I love this story because all she needed to get healed was to grab the hem of His garment. It is so symbolic of the fact that on this side of eternity, we will never have a full comprehension of Jesus. You guys follow me on that? God is knowable and unknowable all at the same time on this side of things. But once we get to the other side, right? Hello from the other side, right? Once we get to the other side, there is going to be a complete understanding of the God that we serve. But I don't need to grab the wholeness of Jesus to receive. I just got to grab the hem of His garment. I just need a little bit of Jesus. I just need a little bit of Jesus. Whatever I can grasp of Jesus, I've got news for you. It's more than enough for your need. There is no need in your life that you can grab something of Jesus, bring it back, and say, this is not enough Jesus. You could grab the tiniest, most minuscule piece of Jesus, and that in and of itself will be more than enough for each and every need in your life. What do you have that's like the nail in that woman's head? Right? She's sitting there and she's talking about it, right? Jen, I heard you. It's my favorite line. She's like, yeah, all my sweaters are snagged. It's like, right? It's like when you got the nail sticking out, what do you think is going to happen? And so she's sitting there and she's talking about it, and she's got it all figured out. And I love when the guy he doesn't say anything. He's like, right? I'm here to tell you, man, Jesus is that guy. He's staring at that nail, and He's like, I can do it. Stop talking about it. Stop trying to figure out how to live around it. how to make do with it. I'm here for you so that nail doesn't have to be there anymore. You see what I love about that video? I'm about to Jesus juke the title out of this video. You ready? The title of that video was, "It's not about the nail." And it's absolutely right. Because it's about 3 nails that hung Jesus to that cross. That when he came off that cross, he did not stay buried, but 3 days later, he rose up and he said, "You've been set free. Your account has been paid in full. In my grace, there is healing. In my grace, there is mercy. There is compassion. There is strength. All of that is available in my grace." And so, yes, it's not about the nail. It's about 3 nails that nailed Jesus to the cross and that Jesus overcame that we might be healed. The 1 nail loses its power in the shadow of the 3 nails. Jesus is that guy, and he's looking at you, and he just wants to fix it. Jesus is the ultimate fixer. He can fix it all. That's the amazing thing about God's redeeming power, is that there is nothing that he cannot redeem. But what are you doing with that nail? You're sitting there just talking about it? You're sitting there just figuring out how to make life work with it? Now listen, I fully acknowledge that Paul talks about his thorn in the flesh, right? And Paul talks about this thing that was just got him worked up. But that's where God says one of the most amazing lines in all of the Bible. My grace is all sufficient for you. And so you might be hearing that thinking, okay, so why am I going to take the risk of standing up and stepping out if maybe, just maybe, this scar and this wound, maybe it's one of those things that God is saying, my grace is all sufficient for you. Listen, you lose nothing in trying to grab a hold of Jesus. Nothing. You don't lose anything. God can minister all the time, right? He doesn't need to meet us on our level. We need to meet him on his level. And so don't let fear keep you in your seat this morning. Because whatever that might be, whatever that nail is that's sticking out, I'm here to tell you, even if God does look at you and say, my grace is all sufficient for you, guess what? That grace is all sufficient for you. It never runs out. It's there for you. If you were here Friday night, we played this song. And so the first part of this worship team, you can wait, not yet. The first part of the equation, you see, it's about belief in grace. Do you believe Jesus is enough? See, the song says this: sickness can't stay any longer. Your perfect love is casting out fear. You are the God of all power. And it is your will that my life is healed. But I want to talk about the third line of that bridge. You are the God of all power. When we start to live in avoidance and in denial of scars and wounds, we are attributing power to them that they were never meant to have over us. Jesus has all the power. Jesus said it. I have been given all power on heaven, right? All power in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Jesus has it all. Do you remember when Jesus stood in front of Simon? Simon, Simon, indeed, the devil has asked for you that he may sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you, listen, that your faith will not fail. Why? Action flows from faith. Action flows from faith. And Jesus says, Peter, when you return to me, strengthen your brethren. Grace is not meant just to heal us and fill us and empower us, but turn us into ambassadors of grace. That once I realize the beautiful light I have been called into, out of the darkness I had been in, it's up to me to turn around and start extending that grace and that love to others. But the question is, whose scars are you going to live by? If you choose to live by your scars, you are living a powerless life. But buried deep in the scars on his palms is the glory of the day that death died. Oh, buried deep in those scars is life. Only Jesus has life in his scars. Only Jesus has life in his scars. Do you remember Thomas was in pain in that room that day because he had been cast as doubting Thomas? And so there in his pain of disbelief, Jesus stuck out the symbol of his pain to say, I connect with you, and I understand you, and I am here for you. And so I want you to know, there is no power in your scar unless you let it have power. But Jesus' scars have all the power. And if you let your life be dictated by those scars and not your scars, you encounter freedom. You encounter liberty. Esther, come on up. There are things that have been suppressed and repressed that have exerted tremendous power and influence in your life. It has determined who you surround yourself with, how you view yourself, and in every way it has exerted influence. It has been given a power that at the very mention of Jesus' name, it can be stripped bare. And Jesus, who is the embodiment of grace, he can move you from the place of belief to the place of relief. Oh, is there anyone here that needs relief this morning? What did Jesus say? He said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So when you're carrying around these heavy scars that are pressing you down, that are oppressing you, that are exerting this huge negative influence in your life, I'm here to tell you, you're missing out on what Jesus promised you. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Don't just believe in grace, but be relieved by grace this morning, because his grace is all sufficient for you. Worship team, you guys can come up. Today I'm challenging you to be the woman in this story. Because listen, it was a two-step process for this woman to grab a hold of Jesus that completely changed her life. It started with her perception. Your reception of grace will be limited by your perception of grace. You need to change your focus from your scars to his scars. Because what does the Bible tell me? By his stripes I am healed. And so there's action required this morning. The Bible tells us this: 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. I'm usually not aggressive with how I close a message. I like to lay back and be very passive about it. But this morning, it's going to be a 2-step process. First, you need to stand out, and then you need to go to where Jesus is. And so my question to you this morning is this: if you are here, gathered under the mighty, victorious name of Jesus, before we even start to sing a word, I ask you to stand if you're gathered here under that name this morning. Because I believe that Jesus wants to impart healing and wholeness this morning. But now, they're going to start to sing this song that says that sickness, it can't stay any longer, that he has all power. His perfect love is casting out fear, and that it is his will that your life is healed. And so worship team, you guys can sing, but now it's up to you. Where is your perception of Jesus? That scar, that wound, that pain, it can be met today by just grabbing a little bit of Jesus.